Hey everybody, we are back to talk some more about the loves of my life, books. I wanted to talk about something really important to me. It was something that if I hadn't been introduced to it as a child, I think I would have probably broken. Um, and that is books, specifically how they came into my life in a way that pretty much saved me. Now, I'm not going to go down some path saying that I had some horrendous childhood or something like that. I had a relatively good childhood. I had some pretty rough times with my parents, the things they were going through, and just my own interactions at school and how things were. And books basically were a gateway for me. They were an escape, that's for sure, but they were also a way to gain perspective. They were a way to really see that outside of my own bubble of experience, there was more. And, I was primarily reading fantasy when I was younger. And some people might say, well, that's obviously not based on reality, so how could that have given you experience in a way and allowed you to see that there was more to life? Well, actually, I think fantasy allowed me to expand out even more so, because not only could I see through the perspectives that I gained in these novels of how these characters developed and grew and expanded beyond, the limits of their own families, their friends, the things that had been done to them, but I could also see that there was this creative life outside of this little bubble of despair that I had, for the most part, created for myself. Now, some people might disagree with this, but I do genuinely believe that even if you have hard things happen to you, even if you, regardless of the severity, although, again, I would never deem to compare, like, someone who's been, let's say, physically abused to the utmost degree with someone who just had, like, a crappy childhood or something. But we all deal with our issues in our own ways, and being able to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, know that there's something more, that there's people out there who are creating beautiful things, that they're coming up with stories and using these stories to showcase entire new ways of thinking and feeling. I mean, you go beyond the boundaries of fantasy, you go into philosophy, you go into poetry, you go into art, you go into pretty much any style of book, and you can see this amazing possibility that there's more out there. There's more to learn, there's more to think about, there's more to feel, there's more to experience. I mean, many of the books that I've read, they were inspired by real life things. Most authors are inspired by things happening with their own lives, things happening in their friends' lives, stories they've already heard. Many times history. The history of the human race is massive. It is expansive. It is horrible. It is beautiful. It is delightful. It is tragic. There is so much within human history to look at and really see how much we've grown. There's a lot of people who look at the things happening in the world these days, and they genuinely believe, due to their own experiences, their own perspective, that this is like a terrible time. But for me, this is the best time there has ever been in human history. Anyone who understands human history has to know this. But many people, unfortunately, they're stuck in this bubble. They can't see past 2 feet in front of them, especially with social media these days and online and all that crap. People's 2 feet in front of them many times has actually nothing to do really with the life happening around them, but everything to do with what they're reading on their phones or reading on their computers. And so people are just ingesting all this negativity from online. And I'm not arguing against the fact that there isn't some bad things happening depending on the context of where you live in your own life, but many people simply cannot push past that. They cannot see anything but, and social media is amplifying it like crazy. Whereas books, many times, even when you're reading a book which is talking about like social reform or bad things, many times books are able to give that perspective in a way that doesn't leave you feeling like shit after, because books have purpose. Many times they're made many times, even when they're bad, they're made for educational purposes. You kind of can pull much from it. I've never read someone who read a book and then went out and did like a whole bunch of negative things. I'm sure that happens, obviously, and books definitely have the potential to turn people into very negative, like, spheres of influence. But at the same time, books have way more potential to do good than they do to do bad, comparatively to many of the ways that people are intaking information these days, especially social medias. Now, I'm not fully against social media, but it definitely has way too many problems. And for me, books as a child were my way of dealing with all my social anxiety, my inability to fit in, the problems I was having with my parents at home, their own problems that they were trying to deal with, that they basically, because they could not deal with their own stuff, I was obviously witness to this, and that's very confusing for a child. But books really helped solidify for me how important it was to understand that there's more to this, that any problem I have can be kind of overcome. And even if things are very difficult, there's always more. There's more out there. There's more to see. And fantasy was really fantastic for that. I will argue black and blue with people. I do believe fantasy is the best genre that exists. You can include science fiction in there, but it's just basically the concept that when you take a novel, when you take a series of books, and you take everything in there is you can say 70-80% based on reality, in a sense. It's based off economics, concepts of personal development, personal interaction with other people, empire development, culture, all sorts of things. All those similar ideas that you can just pull from reality are in a fantasy or a science fiction novel. The only thing is there's the added bonus of fantasy elements or science fiction elements, which help really push and expand our minds even more, because by adding elements that don't exist in reality, but they give us that sense of like, wow, that awe that many of us lose in our day-to-day, because most people kind of grow up and they don't really recognize how amazing life is. You know, when you get on a plane, most people are, even the person getting on a plane for the first time doesn't sit there going, oh my God, I am flying in the sky. Like it's this incredibly amazing thing that we're doing, and most people don't appreciate it in the slightest, in the same way as like pretty much anything. You know, driving in a car, seeing a tree, how incredible that is. Like almost everything is so complex. Even if you were to go and spend all your time studying it and fully understand all the mechanics, it's still magic in and of itself. But many of us, we just don't see that. But at least with things like books, and of course now with film and television and stuff, you get to see these things out in front of you, and it kind of rekindles that belief in magic, that belief that there's something more to the world. And many people, they get that through religious practices and whatnot, but even the most religious of people, many times they don't really ponder about, you know, how awesome, you know, a demon or an angel existing would be. Like, what would that be like if that thing actually exists? Most religious people are not thinking like that. They're just thinking like, God is great, God is magical, he's going to take care of my family, and then I'm going to die and we're going to go to a nice, beautiful place. You know, they're not really thinking about how incredible the fantastical elements of that is. Whereas books really push that to the fore. So I definitely think that if it hadn't been for finding books even, I mean, they were pretty much pushed on me. My mother said that when I was younger, I could not even focus on a book. She had to lock me in the room and like hold me against her as she read to me to force me to learn how to read, which is hilarious to me because by the time I was like 5 or 6 years old, I was reading these big books. But again, if you look back on that, I guess it kind of just got like knocked into my head that this is what I was going to do. And of course, after that, because my mom was such a huge reader and other family members were such big readers, I kind of had that inspiration, that education being shown to me that this was a good thing, this was a way to learn, this was a way to just discover new things and for pleasure, basically. So books are really just they're this portal for people dealing with any kind of issue to kind of delve into and learn anything they want, experience anything they want, find out new perspectives, and really just grow as a person. And I think that helped me a lot when I was younger, especially when I was dealing with a lot of stuff. But even when I got older and I took real responsibility for my own actions, and I made tons of mistakes and still do, and screw up and still try to figure things out. But books help me. They kind of ground me in a strange way, that even though I'm reading, let's say, a fantasy novel or a science fiction novel, and it's so creative and imaginative, and it's, you would think, gonna put me in dreamland, it actually helps ground me in reality, that this physical thing there that someone out there dreamt up and thought about and then wrote down and created all these things, and now I'm just enjoying this story, and it really just sets me in the present moment instead of allowing that monkey brain to kind of go mental and off the wall. A lot of us, people with anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts, or depending on the extreme of your thing, we need that escape. And books, at least for me, don't do the same thing that a film or or a TV show, even though I can really, really love them many times, they kind of just are more of a distraction. As soon as they're done, I kind of fall into like a mood again. Whereas a good book makes me feel good. It starts changing the way I think. I follow along with the character and I get so into it that my whole way of living and thinking within my mind just completely gets shattered and restructured, at least while I'm reading it. And that can really help integrate change, whereas TV and shows just don't do that in the same way, at least for me. Perhaps for other people who grew up with that medium more than I did, it does that for them. But for me, books were a lifesaver. They really helped keep me from going down really dark, deep holes, especially when I was a teen and I was very, very depressed and went through massive cycles of that. And I mean, I don't blame anyone or even my environment. I think it was mainly just me, because just my monkey brain was just always going. And so I was just putting myself in these massive depressive states, and I was just constantly thinking about harming myself. And so my teens were not very good. And without books, I don't think I ever would have really hurt myself, but I probably would have gotten a lot closer, and I think I would have had a lot more issues. So yeah, I definitely think people could get a lot more out of books, and I blame a lot the school system. I blame the lack of importance that we put on our libraries. I blame a lot of how we've set up our educational system, and even how parents talk. Parents don't talk about books enough. They put way too much importance on other things. They distract their kids with idiocies when they're younger instead of giving them books to read. A lot of people just don't get into the habit of reading, which is something that should be built into your child. Now, some kids aren't going to pick it up. I don't think everybody needs to read like 3,000 books a year, but it's definitely something, it's a skill that needs to be developed. And most kids just aren't given that skill to develop by their parents, by the education system. And after, school system just destroys any desire they have to read, because they're forced to read books that are so damn boring most of the time. So yeah, I mean, in the same way that the education system pretty much destroys a lot of kids' desire to learn, it is not a very efficient system. So yeah, I just wanted to share that perspective, because I think it is extremely important, and I think many people out there should give it a shot, should try reading a little bit more. I'm definitely more of a person who leans towards fantasy and science fiction, but philosophy, poetry, music, autobiographies, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you happy, you can find a book about it, and you can just delve into those worlds. So try it out. If you have any thoughts, opinions, let me know down below in the comments. Like, subscribe, check out the website at GeeksnBarbells.com, and enjoy thy weekend, my friends. Have fun.